Chapter 2. Life Before the Crime. Leslie's family's early life reads like a post-World War II working-class success story. She was born on August 23, 1949, in a modern Southern California hospital. It was the era when the greater Los Angeles area was rapidly changing from a lightly populated agricultural paradise to a string of technology and tourist-dependent boomtowns. Her handsome father, Paul, was an automobile auctioneer. Her mother, Jane, was strongly beautiful. They both had great love for Leslie and her older brother. Later, the Van Houtens adopted a younger boy and a girl who had been orphaned in Korea. Honest, hard-working, church-going people, the Van Houtens were devoted to their 4 children. By 1960, they were a clean-cut, loving family living in a comfortable middle-class house with a pool in a Southern California suburb. But trouble was brewing. Major change was in the offing. Leslie's parents divorced in 1963 when she was 13. Jane Van Houten, now a single mom with 4 kids, went back to school to renew her teaching credentials. Paul, who moved to a city nearby when he left the family home, continued to give his children attention and financial support. Jane went on to develop a successful career in special education, but according to Leslie, her mother loved being an at-home mom and would have loved to stay one. It seemed clear that, however well Leslie's mother succeeded in sustaining a good life for herself, her first priorities were always the welfare of her 4 children. Entering her 3rd year of high school, Leslie appeared to be without problems. She had a boyfriend, and for the 2nd time, she was elected homecoming princess. But she was coming into womanhood at a time of cultural upheaval, when girls were paying heavily for free love, and she, like other teenagers, discovered marijuana and hallucinogens. At age 16, she took LSD for the first time, unbeknownst to her parents, and continued to use it with her boyfriend on weekends. Meanwhile, she became pregnant and secured an abortion, a trauma to herself and to her family. As she gravitated towards the counterculture, Leslie reduced her participation in most school activities and became more esoteric in her interests. She read Timothy Leary, a proponent of the consciousness-raising benefits of LSD, and P.D. Ouspensky, an evolutionary cosmologist. She began studying with a spiritually oriented group called the Self-Realization Fellowship. Soon her grades were declining, and her teachers were talking to her about the importance of fulfilling her academic potential. Though she no longer identified with her classmates, she remained on good terms with them, continuing to be reliable, trustworthy, and likable. After graduation in 1967, Leslie lived with her father and attended a business college where she trained to be a legal secretary. She was not planning a career. Rather, she was preparing to be useful to a yogic spiritual community where she intended to reside upon completion of her studies. The confounding life questions that had been looming over the culture at large were taking shape in her personal life. By the time she finished her course, she, like many, was restless. Instead of joining the yogic community, she went on the road. In the 1960s, the USA was swooning with the weight of challenges to every traditional value, every hypocritical practice, every war and injustice. White middle-class kids like Leslie were bursting out of cultural constraints all over North America. They were listening to folk music's strummed messages, the groove of rhythm and blues, and the beat of rock and roll. They were elevating their spirits, not with alcohol, but with marijuana and other recreational drugs. Young people were constructing a vibrant counterculture to their liking. Rebellions were generated by protests against civil rights violations and the Vietnam War, or were reflective of new contact with Eastern religions. With tens of thousands of apolitical others, Leslie, a California girl in search of meaning, wandered in search of someone or something to show her the way. There were many spiritual movements with charismatic leaders to choose from. Their activities were not always solely of a spiritual nature, however. In particular, the very popular Moonies, named after the founder of their unification church, Sun Myung Moon, were investing heavily in ethically dubious enterprises such as munitions. In the mid-70s, the word cult began to be used by the public when speaking of these groups. Their methods of keeping members increasingly came under attack. Some cults were successful in acquiring large membership, wealth, and legal standing as alternative religions in the States. The highly disparate International Society for Krishna Consciousness, the Divine Light Mission, and the Church of Scientology. The late 1970s saw the beginning of the deprogramming industry, whose services could have benefited Leslie and her co-defendants a decade earlier. Deprogrammers themselves were arrested on charges of kidnapping and conspiracy. Young people prosecuted parents who interfered with their right to religious freedom. Deprogrammers, notably Ted Patrick, who coined the term, argued that cult techniques were robbing people of their natural capacity to think and choose. In late summer 1968, Leslie was staying with friends in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district, the counterculture's mecca. One day, her roommate brought home a group of young people with whom Leslie felt instant kinship. The group included Gypsy, a raven-haired, free-spirited, vivacious young woman. Gypsy told Leslie that she and her friends lived in the here and now. She invited Leslie to drop out totally and join their pilgrimage with a guru of love and peace, a man named Charles Manson. Leslie went off with them that day. In this easy-come, easy-go, psychedelic counterculture, it was not unusual to pick up and move on with strangers. In September, her new friends, Bobby Beausoleil, Gypsy, and another girl named Gail, took her for a one-night visit to Spawn Ranch, the movie set the transient group had made its home. 3 weeks later, Leslie returned to stay to be with this man who gently admonished her to give up her personal identity, to let her ego die, to become, as she put it, like a finger on a hand. Manson would watch her and mirror her moves with his own expressions, which reassured her that he saw her and understood her feelings. He would hold up his open palms facing her, and she would do the same. She would then try to mirror his changing hand movements and facial expressions, to anticipate and be in sync with his moves and impulses. On one occasion, he told the whole group, gathered for the evening, to baa like sheep. And, as Leslie said in her interview with Diane Sawyer, aired in 1994, every single one of us did it, exactly at the moment that he said it. Those who were with Manson at that time have attested to how gentle and mystical he was then, inspiring them with tender, insightful utterances and gestures. He found them wherever he wandered, these young people ready to follow him. For a short time before Leslie knew him, he called himself the gardener, because I tend to all the flower children. One of his trust games was to have one of the girls standing against a tree, and he would then throw knives in her direction, never hurting her. As he gained power over more young people, and more women in particular, he became more obsessed with death and violence, asking if they were willing to die for him. By then, they trusted him so thoroughly they accepted his negative turns as necessary to their humility and enlightenment. Once enlightened, they could start saving the earth, or black people, or whoever needed help, according to Manson. He may not have set out to gather a family of runaways. He may not have consciously used deliberate mind control techniques. But accounts of his 1967 and 1968 initial meetings with a number of the women have a similar tone. His first follower was Mary Bruner, a 23-year-old librarian at the University of California at Berkeley. He was playing his guitar on the street outside the university gates, and she was walking her dog. He started talking with her, and he affected her deeply. Since he didn't have a home, she offered him her couch. This openness was not unusual for young people then. Manson confirmed for her how alienated she felt from the rigid inhibitions of the life she lived, and he offered a much more honest and loving way of being in the world. Before long, Mary had left her job, cashed in money from her retirement benefits, and gone off with him. Restless, Manson migrated between Northern and Southern California. One day in Los Angeles, he was walking along the Venice Beach boardwalk and came upon Lynette Fromey, age 18, sitting on a bench, looking dejected. Lynette was in college and living with her parents, to their mutual distaste. In particular, she did not get along with her father. She wanted to leave, but couldn't afford to. Manson approached her with, "What's the problem?" From her biographer's account, she was instantly entranced by him. She thought he looked like an elf, or a hobo with a touch of class. He explained to her that he was the gardener. She told him her problems, and he responded like a comforting, warm father figure. He talked in riddles that made sense to her. The way out of a room is not through the door. Just don't want out, and you're free. Am I right or left of anything? Or is that all relative? Manson was heading back up north to the San Francisco Bay Area, and he said she was welcome to go along with him. When he started to leave, Lynette grabbed her school books, ran to catch up with him. I don't know why. I didn't care. And was thereafter devoted to him. Patricia Krenwinkel, whose similar story is told in a chapter ahead, was the third girl to join up with him at that time, in 1967 to 68. Susan Atkins was the fourth. Susan met Manson in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco, where they were both crashing in other people's paths. She entered the communal house where he was staying, and she writes, "My eyes landed instantly on a little man, sitting on the wide couch in front of the bay windows. Without moving his head, he opened his eyes and stared directly into my face. I stared back. He was playing his guitar, surrounded by young women. Susan thought he looked like an angel. He read her mind when she thought to herself that she'd like to play his guitar, and he handed it to her. It was as though our minds were speaking. She put on a record, The Doors, and began to dance. Soon he was dancing with her. Suddenly, something happened that has no explanation. I experienced a moment unlike any other. This stranger and I, dancing, passed through one another. It was as though my body moved closer and closer to him and actually passed through him. We mirrored each other perfectly. 'You are beautiful,' he said. 'You are perfect.' As Jesus had done with his chosen disciples, he washed her feet. He told her to love herself. She believed he was a saint, disguised as an ordinary man. 2 days later, he said, "Come on, we're going to L.A." And she went with him and Mary and Lynette and Pat in an old school bus he'd acquired. She said of him, "Charlie had instantly seemed more of a father to me than my own father." Soon, not unlike a father, he was criticizing her for being disobedient. He played me like a yo-yo, first hugging and praising me, then demeaning me in some way. But she and all of them stayed, spellbound. Mary and Lynette were alone when they first encountered Manson, and Susan was among strangers. Pat and Leslie, and all 7 of the young women I met who were devoted to him, have spoken in various ways of how he presented himself to them as a wise man with uncanny, intimate insight, a powerful protector. All 7 of those I met reported that he spoke their thoughts. Each of them, from the first moment, trusted him utterly. A number of them said that with him they felt truly beautiful, perfect, for the first time in their lives. Each instantly made a radical change in her life to be with him. He was about 15 years their senior, a semi-literate, mystical, bright, self-styled social critic, a musician, songwriter, and clown, irresistible to them and to many other young people. All raised as Christians when they learned that he was an ex-prisoner, without knowing the details of his crimes, they were more than ever convinced that he was a savior, persecuted by the state, just as Christ had been persecuted by the Roman state. According to his own telling in 1978, Charles Tex Watson struck the final death blows of all 7 of the murder victims, contrary to the press's and D.A. Vincent Bugliosi's renditions, and contrary to the women's own testimony in their trial. As enthralled with Manson on their first meeting as the women had been, Watson met him at the home of Dennis Wilson, a member of the popular golden-imaged rock band the Beach Boys. Dennis had given shelter to a number of the girls in Manson's rapidly expanding family. Watson said of their first meeting in late spring 1968, there he was, surrounded by 5 or 6 girls, on the floor, with a guitar in his hands. He looked up, and the first thing I felt was a sort of gentleness, an embracing kind of acceptance and love. A year later, with his followers gathered around a campfire, Manson would be holding a knife, turning it slowly to catch the light of the fire, and asking each person, in turn, if he or she was ready to die for him. Watson later described his response, while Manson turned the knife slowly, menacingly. I didn't even have to think about it. Sure, Charlie, you can kill me. I meant it. Like some mystic, so filled with the love of God that nothing is too great to ask, I was filled with Charlie. He was God to me. While growing up in a rural Texas community, Watson had been very involved in the Methodist church his parents attended. I even led devotions for the youth group and gave talks for Sunday night evangelistic services. He was also an all-around athlete, a record-breaking track star, an honor student, and he raised a prize-winning calf. In a phone call from California to his mother in Texas, after having become an instant Manson convert, Watson told her, "You've always wanted me to be religious. Well, I've met that Jesus you preach about all the time. I've met him, and he's here right now with me in the desert." Charlie was Jesus. He was my Messiah, my Savior, my soul. He could ask anything, even my life, and it was his. My ego was dead. Anything that asserted I, me, or mine was dead. Sure, Charlie, you can kill me. As I said it, I knew that Charles Denton Watson, all-American boy, letterman, scout, future farmer of America, twice voted campus kid at Farmersville High School, that Charles Watson was totally dead. Manson and his growing entourage claimed a special spot on the barren desert near Death Valley as their own wilderness retreat. It was here that Leslie, renamed Lulu or Lou, first met Pat, then known as Katie. Manson called Pat my complete reflection, and Pat became Leslie's close friend and mentor. After Leslie's arrest, still very much under Manson's control, she said, "Katie was my best friend. She was strong enough to kill. So I would too. I wanted to be just like her." When they were at Spawn Ranch in the carefree pre-crime days, they would all dress up in costumes and play out fantasy theatricals. These were the Halcyon days of the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour and Ken Kesey's hippie clan, the Merry Pranksters. The women were in the majority at the ranch, and when successful at scavenging, they prepared beautiful meals, not only for Manson's sake, but also out of love for each other. After dinner, they would gather and sing his rock and folk songs with social messages. The women cared for the babies and shared in all the chores. They were sensuous, imaginative, childlike creatures who fantasized imps, gnomes, gremlins, fairies, and other mystical creatures and incorporated those fantasies into their day-to-day interactions. They lived with the faith that life could be joyful if people loved each other. They worked at being free in their sexuality. They dropped LSD once or twice a week to more fully experience their senses, to see reality in a new light, and to kill their egos. Propounding on the necessity of killing egos was Manson's first step in conditioning his acolytes to accept physical death as no big deal, since the body is just a transient vehicle for the spirit, a common view among established world religions, as well as passing cults. During one of his sojourns in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco, Manson and those who started joining up with him got acquainted with some of the staff at the free clinic there. A number of his followers needed treatment for venereal diseases, a result of frequent unprotected sex with whoever drifted in and wanted it. When they were living at Spawn Ranch, the clinic administrator, Al Rose, made a visit to them with David Smith, physician and clinic director. They later published an article in a 1970 issue of the Journal of Psychedelic Drugs, in which they described the family. They identified Manson as a spiritual leader and a father figure. They observed that he expressed a philosophy of nonviolence. Significantly, they saw him as a persuasive individual who served as an absolute ruler of this group marriage commune. They also took note that he referred to himself as God and the devil. Charles Tex Watson later described Manson as a chameleon. His lengthy description in his now out-of-print book is given here because it echoes everything I heard from the women themselves. He was, as some of the girls put it, always changing, and with each change he could be born anew. Hollywood slicker, jail tough, rock star, guru, child, tramp, angel, devil, son of God. He was a magician. He charmed in the original sense of the word, and he had an uncanny ability to meet a person and immediately psych him out, understand his deepest fears and hang-ups, his vulnerabilities. It was as though he could see through you with the all-encompassing eye of God. Like a cat with one ear cocked even in sleep, Charlie was always aware, tensed even in stillness, always picking up the smallest details in any situation. He told us it came from being in prison so long. You never know where a knife might be coming from. His awareness seemed not only intensive, able to look inside you and know all that you were, but comprehensive, holding all the elements of a situation in his consciousness at once. His eyes were hypnotic. They could wash you in love and gentleness, or they could terrorize you, like the face of hell itself. He knew the tricks he could play with his face, and he used the force of his undivided attention consciously. As for the magical powers with animals, which some of the family later claimed for him, I only know that I once saw him walk through a gully full of rattlesnakes, gliding among them and touching them gently on the tails. None of them struck. I think this less had to do with magic than with the fact that animals of all kinds can pick up on the fear in a person. Charlie had no fear left in him, and somehow that was calming to other creatures. And it was a curious deity we were serving. While it meant nothing to him for a human being to die, Charlie would fly into a rage if we killed an insect. While there was supposedly no right or wrong, only what was, Charlie was a fanatical vegetarian because he said killing an animal or eating a dead animal was a crime. While love was supposed to be the meaning of everything, the source of our oneness together, Charlie spent a lot of his time talking about fear. Fear. To Charlie, it was the source of awareness, of connection, of clarity. Wild animals live in a constant state of fear, he told us, and they don't miss anything in their environment. They achieve total awareness of what is around them, and in the process, they are totally lacking in self-consciousness. That was how we should be. Yet we should overcome our fear as well, push ourselves to its limits until nothing frightened us anymore. As far as the women knew, Manson did not identify with or take part in any satanic secret rites and rituals, but he had had at least fleeting contact with self-styled Satanists in prison. However second-hand his influences, they surely could have subliminally supported his impulses to exercise mind control and to act violently without conscience when he saw evidence that the Armageddon he called helter-skelter was coming down. As he interpreted this expression from the Beatles, helter-skelter was the impending chaos of a society that was unraveling, and he wanted to speed the process. Some of his girls on the street during the 1970 to 71 trial adopted witchy robes and symbols associated with cults, but none of them had been in any way exposed to or indoctrinated in anything satanic or occult. As a 60s commune, the family was much less structured, routinized, and ritualized than most cults. But Manson was typical of cult leaders in that he was totalitarian, at first in a soft voice, later aggressively. What Manson seemed to be saying with a mishmash of creeds was that all is all. Everything is everything. Everything and everyone are connected, and all humans contain with themselves both God and the devil. It was not the dark, death-driven Manson to whom Leslie or the other women were attracted. When she entered his circle in September 1968, the family was about peace, love, and harmony, and Manson exemplified those virtues. Less than a year later, she and the others were ready to help him initiate a race war. In the year she was with him, the group grew into a troop of loyal disciples who migrated between camps. The Spawn Ranch, their special places out on the Mojave Desert near Death Valley, for which trips they used stolen cars and dune buggies, and some rented or borrowed suburban houses. They listened incessantly to the Beatles' White Album, which Manson was convinced prophesied his promised Helter Skelter. Manson correlated songs like Helter Skelter and Piggies with the apocalyptic messages in the 9th chapter of the book of Revelation, of which the first verse reads, "And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth. And to him was given the key of the bottomless pit." In Manson's interpretation, the Beatles represented the first four angels, and Manson himself was the fifth. He also claimed that a bottomless pit had been prepared for them in the desert. He knew just where it was, and that's where they would go after they started Helter Skelter. There they would be safe while cities burned. Verse 11 reads, "And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon." Appropriately, Abaddon/Apollyon is translated as destroyer. Apparently, Manson didn't identify the sixth angel, referred to in verse 13. "And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God." He presented his eclectic views as if they were supported by biblical authority. With the combined effects of LSD, Manson's theatrical preachings, and the belief that he personified Jesus Christ, Savior and Lord, his followers heard what he heard. When he reenacted the crucifixion, they believed they saw wounds on his hands. Leslie, and perhaps others, imagined her own body being crucified. They accepted Manson's delusions of grandeur for himself and for themselves. They believed. When Charles Manson said that a race war was the greedy, arrogant white man's karma, they believed it, and believed in their role in it. He persuaded them that Helter Skelter was necessary, and all for the good, with good defined by Manson. They didn't know any details of what Helter Skelter would entail until the time came. He was never explicit. He was typical of cult leaders, though he didn't proclaim himself as one. Cult researchers point out that the cult process is one we call covert induction, driven almost entirely by suggestions, code words, and other indirect commands. As Leslie explained it, he'd say the question is in the answer, and no sense makes sense. Things that would make your mind stop functioning. Once Manson had confounded his followers, he could place in their minds whatever belief, however irrational, he wanted them to share with him. The more pervasive and consistent his control over them, the more entrenched the new beliefs became. When the family returned from the city to Spawn Ranch early in 1969, they began to practice survival techniques under Manson's tutelage. They learned to walk on their heels so they wouldn't leave footprints, to cover their tracks, and to go without water. Each had an individual knife for self-protection. As exercises in both experiencing and going beyond fear, Manson had the men drive dune buggies at dangerous speeds on hazardous roads. They traversed the desert in search of the hole where they would find safety during the conflict. He sent both men and women on what he called creepy crawls, where they would break into homes in the night while the occupants were asleep and rearrange household belongings, usually without taking anything. They all believed Helter Skelter was coming, that it was already happening. Only Manson and a few of his male followers, who did not participate in the murders, but who listened to him in private, had heard his meandering plans, with their ever-changing details, for the start of the final race war. Yet, when the time came, they all knew they were on a mission for the Son of Man, man's son. The details didn't matter. There was room for only one voice of authority, a decidedly male voice. Manson's voice. Man's son was one of the most consistent names Manson gave himself in 1969. He would say, then deny, that he was God, Christ, the devil, Lucifer, or the son of any of them, for everyone is everything. But always he was the Son of Man. On the street, the man is the tyrant, the landlord, the authority, the boss, the cop, the one with the rules, regulations, and punishments. The man is to the street person what he was to Bambi. The man is the one who points his gun at you, who has the power to do it, who poses the danger to you and to your mother. That's what prison is about. The man. And indeed, Charlie was the child of that man.